Coming up next, we're back, baby! Hey, everybody, welcome to the Bookening. You thought we weren't coming back. You thought we were finally done. You thought wrong, baby. My name is Nathan. I'm your humble and obedient host. We've got the contextual Texan right there.
Yeah.
It's been so long. It's not that I'm trying to switch up the shtick. As Jake was pointing out just before we started recording, I have switched up the shtick due to certain circumstances on other podcasts.
Due to being ripped off.
I'm like,
let's not beat around the bush and let's not hide it. And let's not pretend like it didn't happen.
It did happen. And when you hear someone doing your stuff, you feel a little self-conscious. And you might properly say, Nathan, don't let them take that from you. Like, that's not a thing. You should. And fair enough. But also, I was just like, someone threw rocks through my windows. And so you could say, you repair those windows just the way you are. But I'm like, it's a good chance to put a fresh coat of paint on the exterior and put in some...
Maybe I want to make the windows bigger.
Yeah.
To put in a bay window.
Maybe I want to put in a bay window.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe I want to
People still do that. It's a very, very 90s trend.
My parents put it in a bay window.
Brandon, you are... See, here's why I stopped. So let me close. I just opened this whole tab about everything because I do not remember what I'm supposed to call Brandon. You are... the contextual Texan. You are the scholar who's a baller of reading.
There it is.
Or of books.
There it is.
And I know, of course, Jake
It's
is
all coming back to us now.
the pastor who's a master of books, of reading. And
that's me.
We are here, guys. We are going to talk about Anna Karenina. It's been too long. The last episode was Emma in February, if I'm not mistaken, minus a couple check-in kind of, we're not dead yet episodes.
We're not dead now.
We are not dead. We never died. We, like Gandalf, fell into the abyss. And
I'll just say something.
yes.
Can I?
Yeah, please.
Because it might help our listeners.
Yeah.
I run a company outside of the Bookening, and I
Right.
think you guys have said this in other podcasts, but I'll just say it so they can hear it from me too. And this has been a great year for us. Things have been growing. And with the distance from Evansville and the fact that the company is doing very well.
The emotional distance between the three of us.
The three of us, we've been drifting emotionally apart. We had a brief breakup, but then they came and they held a boombox
yes.
outside my window one day. I was like, in the rain. It was beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful. We ran out, we embraced, kissed, made up.
We talked to Brandon's dad. We said, we're good at loving your daughter, sir.
Yeah.
I'm going deeper into the Say Anything.
So
a movie that I remember liking.
Yeah, I remember liking that movie too.
That is one of those 80s movies you would think that I would have seen a dozen times and never have.
You've seen it 0 times.
I've seen it 0 times.
You've never seen it.
I don't think I've ever seen Say Again.
Yeah,
You guys need to correct that with
I know.
Extreme prejudice.
I know.
I
know.
I
Podcast where you could do that.
No, that's true.
Every time I see that meme or whatever, I'm like, why haven't I seen that movie? It's like every John Hughes movie I've seen a dozen times. It's just stupid that I haven't seen that one.
And at least the way I remember it, it's better. It's the best written of any of those like 80s
That's
teen
what people
comedies.
say.
Yeah.
I just don't know why I missed it and why I never went back to it.
Yeah, I'm afraid the reason I don't make our podcast do it is because I'm afraid that it actually doesn't hold up. I think maybe you had to be there, but it was special.
But
to have
I
been
was there for everything else, and so it's just going to be...
Might as well fill in the gap, yeah.
I don't know. I feel like it's one of those things that, like, if you were there for the moment, that moment's never actually gone.
Why are we talking about Say Anything? Oh, because we got Brandon back by
holding
boom
Holding a
boxes.
boombox.
Yes.
Yeah, but I was actually explaining some things.
Yeah. Go ahead. Tab closed.
But yeah, and the business is going very well and things are going well. And so, which means I have less time.
Yes.
And so appreciate everybody's patience, but we are here.
Right. And we try not to make false promises on the Bookening. We've made a few in our time. So I don't want to go too far out on the limb here, but we think we've got a plan for regular recording that will get you at least your monthly episode. I kind of have my fingers crossed for more, but
Yeah, same.
we'll see what happens. Yeah.
Yeah, I am the most under promise, over-deliver type of person.
That's like Jake's motto.
It's like one of my life mottos. And I'm so done with not having the bookening that I'm ready to just promise it's one way or another, by hook or by crook, the show will go on.
Right.
I think we all kind of feel we need it too.
Yeah, the show filled... I was about to say something incredibly crazy over the top. I was about to say it fills a spiritual need. That might be a little hyperbolic.
I don't know that it is hyperbolic, actually.
I don't think it's hyperbolic.
I think it's just real. Like, it's the combination of what we're doing and who we are. And so it's our friendship, each of us our own individual need to be in this sort of creative world of letters. And we need it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I think the bookening helps us as people. It helps us process things. It helps us process personalities. I don't know. There's a lot we could say about that, but we are committed to making the show happen.
I had an old pastor not long ago call me out of the blue and say, you need more things in your life that fill you with positive mental energy. And he was apologetic for that phrase over and over again. But this is just he was right. And this is one of those things.
Yeah, I think as a man, you have to figure out how to fill yourself up one way or another so that you can give to other people. You can't be running on empty spiritually, emotionally.
Yep.
And if you just go from your job to your family, to your church friends, to your hangout friends, to your whatever, to your club, to your sports, to your what, you can really be running dry if you don't find things.
It's a recipe for burnout.
Yeah. You have to take some time for yourself, a little self-care. I'm using that phrase sarcastically because how can you not? But I think it's true. You actually do have to make sure that your mind has something to chew on that brings you joy.
And that's not all in the same vein as your work, you know, or it's just like you need things outside the box. And so much of our life here now is planting this church and loving and caring for people and preaching and teaching Scripture, and Brandon's is building his business, which is oil and gas, land and title, that sort of thing. We need these other kinds of outlets.
Yep.
We're going to go nuts.
Yeah, 100% agreed. 100% agreed. We will go nuts.
So I already started going nuts.
We already started going nuts.
This is the move back to sanity.
Yep. Back to sanity. Maybe that's how we'll rebrand the show.
Back to sanity.
Back to sanity. So here we are. And we're talking the best novel that we've ever read on the podcast. Does anyone want to dispute that?
Brandon might.
Brendan did love Ready Player One.
I loved Ready Player One.
So you'd say this.
I mean, we'll talk about it.
We'll talk about it. Okay. Well, the only way to really talk about it is to get into it. And in order to do that, we need some context.
Yeah, we do.
Brought to us.
Ah!
Oh, no.
No!
Jake's been shot 3 times.
Man.
He's handling it remarkably well.
Yeah. Woo. Shoot him again.
Brandon, of course, is a kid.
Stop
Die.
Brandon.
That tickles, man.
Wow, Brandon. How many shots does your 6-shooter hold?
Can I get a little more in my monitors? Or a little more me in my monitors?
A little more you.
Monitor all together.
Yes.
A little more Jake in my monitors.
Just a little bit.
A little less conversation. We went for 2 different things there. Yeah.
That'd be a weird mashup song.
It's good.
Is that Mambo number 5 and a little less talk, a lot more action?
I was doing that Elvis song that got
Oh.
popular again for a while there. They did a remix of it or something in the 90s. Little more conversation. Or no.
Okay.
It's probably a little less conversation. I'm going to imagine Elvis doesn't want more conversation.
I don't think he did.
A little less action.
A little less conversation, a little more peanut butter and bananas, bacon sandwiches.
I think what he's saying is, I'd rather be having sex than talk to you. Which is what the lyric really should
From
have
what
been.
I understand about Elvis's life is he would have actually been rather eating
Stuffing his
really disgusting peanut butter
fat face with...
versions of sandwiches.
I don't want to know what Elvis ate.
Oh,
yeah.
my goodness. Him and what's his face?
Grimace.
Yeah. Grimace.
Topical.
That's exactly what I was going to say. Very topical. It'll still be topical by the time this episode actually drops.
Why is Grimace topical right now? You're
Because
right.
he had like a birthday and they did a shake thing.
He had a
and there's
birthday.
a whole
It's his birthday. Come on.
viral thing. It was like the Grimace birthday shake. And then they did this viral TikTok thing where they paid a bunch of influencers to act like they died. Like that.
Who started it?
I don't know that.
I think McDonald's started
Grimace. Yeah, Jake says like the man started it.
Joe Biden.
Joe Biden. Listen, we're big Biden fans on this podcast. Brandon voted for him 4 or 5 times.
Yeah. I mean, as I couldn't remember whether or not I had
Made
already
sure his
voted.
dead grandparents voted at least 12 times.
Yeah, way to drag my dead grandparents into this, Jake.
True story. Jake dug up Brandon's dead grandparents and drug them into the podcast studio.
Into the show. Yeah.
Brandon's dead grandpa is just slumped over there in the 4th chair.
He thought the Grimace stuff was horrifying. He used to see what's sitting in the chair over here.
Oh, it's awful.
Way to decompose Brandon's grandparents.
Yeah.
What are you, dead?
Yeah.
I hope your grandparents are really dead.
My dad's parents are, yeah.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow. Oh my goodness.
We're supposed to be doing context, right?
Hey, we had to
This
get it
is
all out of our
context,
system.
guys.
Yeah.
This is what people have been waiting for, right?
Yes.
This is the nonsense that they pay for.
The real listeners are still with us.
The real listeners are still with us. This was
We're hoping that after 6 months, maybe we'd have a different format and some sense.
You were wrong.
you were wrong.
You were wrong.
Brandon, you are the contextual text, and you do provide much needed. We are talking about
do.
Anna Karenina, the great novel by
We are.
Leo Tolstoy. Leonardo Tolstoy. Is that his full name?
No. It's Leov.
Leov?
I think so, right?
Leov? I don't actually know.
It might just be. No, it's Count Lev. Yeah, Lev.
Yeah, I guess
We pronounce it as Leo because we're
Idiots.
not Russian.
Yeah.
So it's Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy.
Yes, all right. Anna Karenina by Count Lev Nikolaevich Tolstoy.
Yeah, we can give some brief background on the guy.
Let's do it.
Let's do it. So why not? Who are we talking about today? This dude.
Some guy who died in a train station. That's all I know.
Yeah. Shares that in common with his heroine of this novel,
Yeah, they both died in train stations.
but not in the same way.
Who else died in the train station?
Well, who else has heroin in common? I think probably Hunter Biden. I think it just ties it all together. I mean, cocaine may be his drug of choice, but
Yeah.
Anna Karenina is my drug of choice, and I left it all over the White House, whatever room is full of cocaine. Topical. Grimace.
guys, there are 5 million people in this country addicted to cocaine, and I think any one of those people could have been responsible for leaving that in
Yeah.
the Biden White House.
Could have been.
I don't think it has to be Hunter.
It doesn't have to be Hunter.
No, it could be any
This is
one
a
of
pretty
5
common,
million
normal
people.
thing anyway. Why
Yeah.
are we so uptight about some cocaine in the White House?
We're not.
I'm not.
Why would we be?
I say go nuts.
Yeah. Do it.
I think full Roman orgy is what we really want from our leaders. Biden should be eating grapes from a maiden. Right now.
That's your active. That's funny.
What's that?
That's no. He was an orgy. He was eating grapes
From a maiden.
from a maiden.
It's one of those Roman orgies.
Yeah, I know.
You've seen those guys. They like
It's
to
just
eat grapes
funny.
from pretty
Yeah.
girls.
Yeah, you wanted to give a detail, but you didn't want to have to edit it out. So that's where you went.
Brandon, we've all eaten grapes from pretty
was-
ladies.
Oh my goodness, guys.
Yeah, he was laying across a couch.
Yeah, you lay on a couch. You lay on
There
your
were grapes.
You lay on your side. You kind of have a decadent pose with your hand holding up your arm. You got a toga, and then
We're going to talk about Tolstoy eventually.
yeah, let's do it.
Take it away, Brandon.
Take it
Let's
away.
go.
He was born in 1828.
Was he?
Hey.
Okay.
Died in
I'm so glad.
1810, which means he died right before the revolution that he likely would have been on the wrong side of.
Like he would have been a socialist.
No, I think he would have been. I mean, towards the end of his life, he was a pacifist. So
He would have been on the side that got devoured.
I think he would have been devoured, yeah. Or at least ousted out of Russia. I mean, Solzhenitsyn was a great follower of Tolstoy, and he was ousted out of Russia. So I don't think he would have been too pleased with the way things went. But yeah, and another reason is because he was born squarely into the aristocracy.
Mhm.
So like, as far as this novel goes, a lot of the context is that Tolstoy lived and breathed this environment. He
Right.
was born into an aristocratic family. His aristocratic family received their title from one of the czars, even though his whole family history, it's really interesting, was like surrounded. I was reading his autobiography not his autobiography.
His autobiography.
Who wrote his autobiography?
I have not. That's one of the things I haven't read by him yet. His book Childhood, or his trilogy that he wrote later on that is loosely autobiographical. I haven't read that yet. I should.
Yeah.
But that would have been handy to have read for this, but I didn't. Sorry, guys.
We only do what we like.
But according to this biography, his family is kind of, their history is shrouded in kind of mystery. Some think that they came from like a Lithuanian family but there's a mythology surrounding the origins of the Tolstoys. What we do know is that Tolstoy was given as a moniker to the family, and it means fat.
Okay.
Which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
And that they did have their ancestral home at Yasna Polaya, or whatever it is, Yasmin Pollyanna.
Jasmine Pollyanna.
Jasmine Pollyanna.
That'll be the name for it now, because I'm not going to look it up. It's some strange, it's YP, the YP, as they would call it.
The Ypres Peninsula.
Yeah, let's go to the YP, guys.
I like this Jasmine Pollyanna thing.
Yeah.
I need to have another daughter.
You did? Would you name her that?
Jasmine Pollyanna Alverson?
Yeah.
You better believe it.
It'd be awesome, and we would be the only ones that get the joke.
And even we wouldn't think it was funny.
Yeah.
And then certainly Jasmine Pollyanna would not think it was funny.
No. Would her nickname be Jazzy? Jazz?
We call her Jasmine.
Jasmine.
I am not a prize to be won.
Yeah.
She'd probably say something
Pollyanna.
Did you get her a pet tiger?
like that. Yeah.
Of course. So anyway, so he was squarely in this aristocratic background.
And a prism.
Mm-hmm.
And a prism. What?
Pollyanna thing.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Did you watch that movie?
No.
Like Pollyanna, the old Pollyanna? Like
Yeah.
The girl that's good and annoying and stuff?
Haley Mills.
Haley Mills, yeah.
I haven't seen it.
Does she put someone in a prism? Does she trap a rival wizard?
Are you thinking of Superman?
No, that's the Care Bears movie, I think, that you're thinking of.
Oh, yeah.
They trapped them all in prisms. No, this is a prism thing in Pollyanna. It's one of the only things I remember about that movie.
I have seen Pollyanna, but I don't remember anything about it besides that she's an optimist or something like that. Like I know the character, but she has like a grumpy old grandpa, maybe
I don't know.
a mountain.
Been a long time.
It's been a long time. All right, Brandon.
I haven't seen it
been
at
a
all.
while
it's
is
been
what you were going for there.
It's been a no time for me.
Yep.
Anyways, there it is. Oh, hey, it's Yasnaya Pollyanna.
It's Naya
So
Pollyanna.
we were really close. I saw it, just happened to see it as I was reading through these notes. So anyways, he had the typical aristocratic upbringing, even though he wasn't a stellar student. In fact, most of his teachers said he was kind of unteachable and, what is the word? Both unable and unwilling to learn.
Running theme on the Bookening.
He did go to university, wasn't like a stellar student there as well, so he ended up going off to war. But he did dabble in writing early. In fact, one of his first books was the book Childhood, which he published in 1852. So that would have put him at the age of what? In his mid-20s, if he was born in 28. So publishing by the age of 24. Is that right? 24? Yeah. While he was in the army, or this was actually before the army. So this is while he was at university. The reason he went to the army was because he got a lot of heavy gambling debts. And so he kind of had a wild upbringing. You can see a lot of similarities between him and Levin and Pierre in War and Peace, especially with his early youth. We don't get a whole lot of context and background to Levin, do we? As far as
We know he stupidly tells Kitty a whole bunch, and it really
he gives
hurts
her his diary.
Yes, that's right.
And so that's the biggest similarity, is that he has done some things in his past that he's ashamed of, and enough that he tells that to his wife. And when Tolstoy married, he would actually do the same thing. There's no reason not to bring this up now. His wife, when she first read what would become the final draft of Anna Karenina, and we'll talk about the various ways the novel came to be what it is. One of her things was she said he had never written a character that was more like him than Levin. Even down to the details of family members and servants and things that happened in their life. Levin was a character that was very much like Tolstoy. And there was somebody, I think it was Dostoevsky, that when he read it, he said, you can find Levins all over Russia.
Yeah.
So it's like he was a Russian type, and Tolstoy was a very Russian type of aristocrat. Like somebody who was kind of caught in this tormenting dualism, this fight between his aristocratic roots and then his religious leanings as well.
Mm-hmm.
And that would kind of dominate in this back and forth through his whole life, which would
his internal sense of Russianness and his philosophical sense of rightness and
and
idealism,
and existence of God and all these things, this metaphysical reality and ethical reality, but also his Russianness. And what does it mean to be Russian in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so, which an overwhelming obsession with death is definitely part of it.
Yeah.
So, which when you live in a country that It deals both with poverty and being seen as a barbaric nation by the rest of the world, but also has a lot of money and the ability to have a huge army, and also does have an aristocracy that wants to be respected by the rest of the world. You kind of get those things.
Get those contradictions, yeah.
Not necessarily insecurities, but frustrations. I don't think of Russian literature as really being an insecure literature, but it's a frustrated literature.
Mm-hmm.
And it can be a dark literature and a very philosophical and abusing literature. And in fact, the introduction to this book that we have, the Pevier and Volkansky edition, the guy makes the point at the last that like the internal cohesion that ties the book together is that both Anna and Levin find themselves alone when they're facing the ultimate reality of death. And that's kind of what drives the novel, is both of them having all these people around them, but then in the end being left to deal with the reality of death and God on their own terms, which we all are. In the end.
That's right.
We all are in the end very much alone in the face of God. So, yeah, I kind of like that. I think it's partly true.
Yeah.
So,
I'm thinking as you talk about the difference between, like you said, they're not, I don't know what you said that made me think of this, but it's like you can't accuse them of being neurotic exactly. They're grandly there's a difference between the grand introspection of even someone like Dostoevsky versus the kind of morbid American 20th century Saul Bellow neuroticism. And I don't know what the difference is.
So I said insecurity too.
Yeah, insecure.
There's an insecurity to American literature for sure. And I think the insecurity comes from its relation to Britain.
Yeah.
And everything great coming out of Britain. And so America didn't have a great novelist as far as the British style, like a Dickens, because you can say whatever you want to about Dickens, but insecurity is not a word you can say about Dickens. That guy was not insecure. But the writers, like Henry James is definitely an insecure writer.
Yeah.
He's not an American writer. He's trying to write about America in a British style, right? And nobody thinks of T.S. Eliot as an American author or poet. He came from St. Louis, but he tried to adopt a British voice. That's kind of like that is the American elite way of becoming a established writer, was to abandon being American.
Right.
Right. And those who kind of leaned into their Americanism were looked down on by the others, like Steinbeck.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Hemingway probably came the closest, but I mean, that guy was still...
He's grandly cosmopolitan. Most of his novels are set in Europe.
Yeah, good grief, the guy. I mean, insecurity all over Hemingway and the other dude, Fitzgerald. Fitzgerald's about as effete and insecure as you get, which is really interesting. That is a culture that leans as much as it does into its masculinity as America does, is as insecure and effete in its final literary production as we can be.
It's interesting. It's like the Russians are like, we can plant our feet and think about these great questions that make us insecure. There's something very manful about the way they do their insecurity, actually. Whereas we're just kind of like, I don't even know if I should be asking this question. But
and even today, I mean, we end up getting leaders like Trump, right? Or the Rogans and those kind of guys with the conservative masculine. And I won't, without saying too much of what I think, you see it in the reform world too nowadays, right? With some of the stuff that's going on with their leaning into masculinity. It's all just deeply, deeply insecure.
Mm-hmm.
But then you have Russia, which can post a picture of their leader riding shirtless on a horse, and it just seems like the most natural thing in the world, right? And it's just like, everybody hates Putin, but there's something there's something dark and nihilistic and other barbarian and stuff, sure, about Russia, but insecurity is not part of it.
Right.
Anyways, that was weird. Where'd that come from?
It
wasn't weird. It was good. But
I agree.
I can't remember where it came from.
If we can't suss out the Russian character by the end of this podcast series and then send them all to President Biden and Congress,
so that they can understand Russia, that's what we're going for.
That's what we're here to do.
We were talking about his debts,
yeah,
and stuff like that, and Levin being a type. That's right. And so it was during this time that he started to write. And so what you see with Tolstoy, kind of starting at this point, is his troubled relationship to his aristocratic roots, and also a drive to either get to something more metaphysical or get to something that's not aristocratic, to get back to the people. There are a few things that kind of drive this. One, he got involved with the Crimean War, and he was you can see this in the sketches from Sevastopol, that he wrote around this time when he was kind of doing like a Hemingway thing where he was writing in the field, battlefield essays.
Right.
He got disenchanted with life at that point. So you had his debts, which drove him to go to war. He's always had a troubled relationship with his aristocratic roots. He gets to Crimea. He sees all this violence. And then as he's traveling, he goes to, I think it's Paris or something, and he sees an execution. And that's just like, that's just it for him. He from that point on, he has a troubled relationship to any politics because he thinks that it leads to violence, which would feed into the later parts of his life when he did become Russian Orthodox, that he leaned so heavily into the mysticism and into the pacifism of his later politics. So, but that's kind of the driving force, this tension, and you see it in his works. Like Tolstoy is he tries to write kind of a realist style, but Tolstoy is always very present in his books. You can tell what he's thinking about someone, right? You can tell that he likes Levin, that he's sympathetic to Levin. You can tell that he's you can tell that he loves Dolly, that he's mildly critical, but also somewhat warm towards her husband, Stepan, right? But you can tell who he hates too, for sure.
Yep.
Like in War and Peace, he did not like the Anatoly, the Karagins, right?
Yeah.
So he did not like that family, and you could feel it. So his judgments come through, yet he finds a way to still.
He always feels fair, like he's fairly drawing people.
Yeah, it's not Jane Austen where it's just like I set up Mrs. Norris to pour everything I hate about my neighbor into this character or something like that.
It's not quite fair to Jane Austen.
No, that's not fair. That's an exaggeration. But Jane Austen, you can really tell like bad guy, good guy. This person is nothing but all the foolish attributes put into a personified.
Everybody in Tolstoy feels just like a well-drawn character, even when he's just showing glimpses of them. And you feel like if he spent enough time with any one of even the Karagins, he would find something about them.
Well, and as I'm sure Brandon's going to talk about, the history of the rewriting of this novel, Anna Karenina herself starts out as such a villainous monster of a character, and then with every rewrite becomes much more human, much more sympathetic, and he finally ends it where he ends it, which is interesting. Like he ended it somewhere on a continuum. He could have kept going and even made her more sympathetic or given us more tragic backstory or something like that. But he calibrates it. He tunes it exactly where he tunes it. And it's really fascinating to watch that process and to be aware of that process. In any case.
Yep. So I guess just to kind of wrap up his life, then after this period, he ends up back at his childhood home. And he becomes more and more liberal in his politics. He emancipates his serfs. He sets up schools, very much like Levin does in the book. A lot of the things that Levin does and believes are very much marked by what Tolstoy believed later in his life. It was just during this period that he also begins to establish his name as a literary figure. And we'll talk about his books in a minute. But he got married in the 60s to a girl 16 years his younger, Sophia, they would call her Sonia, which I found interesting because Sonia is a character in War and Peace. And I wonder if he drew from his wife for that character. She's a great figure in the book, right?
Yeah.
So
the age gap is exactly Levin and Kitty. I think they're 16 or 18 years apart.
They had 13 children, and he did give his diaries to his wife before their wedding, like I think the night before maybe. And it caused about the same sort of results as it did in the novel, right? But their marriage early on was marked by being a pretty happy marriage. But towards the end, it fell apart. And what was the guy's? Ian Wilson, that was his name, said that it was not a very happy marriage towards the end. So anyways.
He had illegitimate children with serfs. Is that true?
He did. Yeah. Let's see. I'm going to have to retract something that I said. So it's the 1917 Russian Revolution, but there were revolutions in 1905, right? So he lived during those.
Okay.
And most of his family fled during that period, but he stayed. But the more violent and radical revolution in 1917 was the one he didn't see.
What is the revolution that Pierre is circling around? And
that would have been the ones. So that would have been with Nicholas when you had the revolutions in like mid 1800s.
Which got squashed,
It got squashed, and they were all killed. Yeah, and so he would have been one of the intellectuals that was probably killed. That's what War and Peace was pointing towards. It's really interesting. So I don't know what his feelings were towards 1905, that revolution, because I was just looking at some important historical, who might probably say it, even though people will hate me from going here. Let me just look this up real fast. Wikipedia might have something to say about it. No, all they say is that he fled. No, that a lot of his family fled, and that's why you have a lot of Tolstoys living in different countries. I'd be interested to know what he says. Are you looking into that, Nathan?
Yeah, I mean, apparently he wrote a whole essay, which I'm not going to be able to grasp, but you can look it up, folks. There's an essay called The End of the Age, an essay on approaching revolution by Leo Tolstoy, written in 1905. So you can find an extensive piece of writing by Tolstoy. Just glancing over it, it looks like it reads very much like one of the little chunks of exposition, whatever you'd call them, the little interludes in War and Peace. I'll give you a taste here. Over every man, wherever he may have been born, there exists a group of individuals completely unknown to him who establish the law of his life, what he should and what he should not do. The more perfect the state organization, the closer is the net of these laws. It is defined to whom and how he shall swear allegiance, to whom he shall promise to fulfill any laws that may be invented and proclaimed. It is defined how and when he should marry. Blah, 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 blah. It just goes on and on like that. Again, sounds very much like one of those essays from War and Peace.
Well, I mean, apparently, so he had as late as 1900. So let's circle back to this then. I gotta think that one thing that would help is to know kind of what books he wrote. Because he didn't really have a whole lot that he wrote. He wrote some short stories throughout his life. But here are his books. He wrote an autobiographical trilogy in the 50s, Childhood, Boyhood, and Youth. Then he wrote his Sevastopol Sketches, which would have been in the 50s. And this would have been the same period as Dickens would have been writing at this time. A lot of the Victorian writers. When was Moby Dick? About this time, right? It might have been a little bit later than that.
Moby Dick is, 1851.
Yeah, that's what I thought. So, booyah.
Booyah.
We know what we're doing here. So yeah, just to kind of put that in context, he's writing around a pretty rich period of history, literary history. Then he wrote some other books that people don't really know a whole lot about. He wrote Family Happiness in 1859, The Cossacks in 63. It wouldn't be until the 60s and then the 70s that we would get his masterpieces. War and Peace in 69, which he spent years on. And then Anna Karenina, which he first had ideas for in the early 70s, but didn't publish until 1877. And he published it serially in a Russian journal.
Anna Karenina was published serially?
Yeah.
That's interesting.
I don't think I remembered that.
Yeah, me neither.
So let me make sure I'm right about that. I don't want somebody to leave us a 1 star.
They're already going to do that because they're going to be like, what about the revolutions of 1905?
Yeah, I know, but we went back and corrected that.
Serial installments from 1873 to 1877. Yes, sir.
Boom.
The Russian Messenger.
It's the little things. And then The Death of Ivan Ilyich would be his last great work of fiction, and that was in 18.
Which is weird that we haven't done that one.
Yeah, I was thinking that.
He does have one more indisputably great work, and we haven't done it for some reason.
And a lot of people have told me it's their favorite.
Yeah.
Certainly the shortest.
It's probably because it's the only thing they actually read.
Right. So it's like saying that Bartleby the Scrivener is your favorite
Dickens.
whale guy. Melville.
Yeah.
Great Expectations. Your favorite Dickens because it's short.
Right. Or Christmas Carol, your favorite
Hard
Dickens.
Times, yeah. But then you're a monster if Hard Times is your favorite Dickens. But
why is Hard Times your favorite?
Because I'm a monster.
People know.
So the 80s was when you see this sort of transit. Well, in the early 70s, he had his religious epiphany and conversion. And then his life is just marked by more and more extremism to the point where he gets away from fiction pretty much altogether, even though he writes some novellas and short stories. But they're more and more extreme. They're more focused on his radical ideas until where you get finally like, what is art? When did he write that? What I believe is in 84. You see what is art? When that was published?
What is art? Tolstoy.
97, so late in his life. And that's kind of like where he's just completely, some of it I agree with, like he heavily criticizes ballet as being an over-sexualized art form. It's like, and you can't really argue with him there. But
no.
But he's also then like dumping on Wagner and all these guys. He just hates everything, right? And it's just pretty much dismissing art as a form as he's moving away himself from fiction and getting more and more into his extremist leftist politics and his pacifism and his, at the same time as marriage, which had been happy in the beginning, was falling apart as he commits himself more and more to his metaphysical visions, and then he eventually abandons his family. He had become kind of a figurehead of the Russian, even though he wrote in the 1900s. So this circles back to the revolutionary stuff. He said he agreed with a lot of what the anarchists had to say because he did believe that deeply that any form of power was to be questioned.
Mm-hmm.
But he didn't believe that violent revolution was the way to go about it.
Right.
So that's his position towards the 1905 stuff. But he had enough of, I think, a reputation in Russia, and he was also just on their side enough that they didn't do anything about him.
Right.
He got to live at his estate and die in peace in a railroad station. That's what ended up happening to him. He wandered off and he died in a rail station. So that's Tolstoy's life.
Yay.
Yeah.
It says here in the book, What is Art? He dismissed many accepted masters, Wagner, Shakespeare,
Yep.
Dante, and the bulk of his own writings.
Yep.
So
that's kind of where he's just washing his hands of his former self and his former love of fiction and art and kind of going cuckoo bananas before he dies. I'm sure he would have loved the use of that word about himself.
cuckoo bananas?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's the first time anybody's used the word cuckoo bananas about Tolstoy.
No. Somebody has. Paul Johnson probably.
Yeah, I bet in his book.
Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
Cuckoo for Cocoa
Yeah.
Puffs.
So,
I never was cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs.
me neither.
Me
They're
neither.
okay. They're puffy. I don't like the puffiness.
Anything else you guys want to add to that?
No.
The only thing I want to do is point out that this is just you reinforcing your case that he's an inferior author to Ernest Cline.
You told us you were going to do that before we hit record.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I'm finally going to make the case.
Yeah.
That he's inferior? Well, I can do that easily, apparently.
I mean, you've succeeded before. I
Yeah.
don't know why you shouldn't succeed now.
So let's see, where do we go next? Let's talk about the history of Anna Karenina's publication.
Let's do it.
Oh!
Yeah. Take that, Jake.
Did you guys know that Ernest
I can
Cline
best you with a gun.
Ernest Cline wrote a poem? I'll give you 3 guesses what it's called.
Oh, yeah. He wrote all sorts of poems. Remember we talked about that dingbat?
They were like super sexual and
Yeah, he was
perverse, right?
He wrote one about how he was really attracted to librarians, which was creepy.
Michael Jackson wrote that song, Librarian Girl.
Oh, wow.
No, it's,
His-
it's Librarian Girl. Is it
His-
Librarian Girl?
His was creepy. Do you guys? Yeah.
I'm actually not making a joke. What is that song?
I don't know, but neither am I. This guy was like into what they call it, the drop poetry or whatever it's called. When you would
Beat
poetry.
poetry.
Yeah. When you get up there and you're like
Yeah.
making it up on the fly. That's like how he made a name for himself.
When you're making up on the fly because your friends, they're all going to die. They're going to
Yeah.
be put in a fryer to fry. Oh me, oh my. You get on the Wi-Fi and then
I like
you start
that
to sigh.
librarian.
Freestyle.
She ain't so scary, man.
It's Liberian Girl is the Michael Jackson song.
Anyways, Ernest Cline's poetry.
Yeah, I'll give you 3 guesses. The name of his
The one poem that you're thinking
the
of.
one poem, it's not a sexual thing or a beat poetry thing. It shares the title of a very famous work of literature. And it's really obvious if you think about what work of literature Ernest Cline would name his poem.
Back to the Future.
Nope. Overthinking it. Need to underthink this.
what he would name his War and Peace.
Ooh. It is a piece of literature famous for its wit, its insouciance, its light souffle-like humorous nature. A play about nothing before Seinfeld.
Importance of being earnest.
That's right, sir.
Oh my.
Oh my goodness.
Oh hell! What?
Oh my goodness. What
You know what?
that does
I just won.
bring up a word.
I just won.
you did. I think
Yeah,
you did.
you
yeah.
did. He's worse than Tolstoy.
Sorry.
Whoops. No, did not mean. I meant to hit the.
Oh,
There we go. That would have been a cool place to end the
Hoist
podcast.
it on your own petard.
Yeah.
oh
Oh,
man, I can't believe that. What a
Man.
masturbatory piece of.
with the importance of being earnest.
Oh my goodness.
Hey, if your name was Ernest, then you probably would make some joke about the name of that thing sometime.
Yeah, at some point.
You wouldn't publish a thing.
No,
called,
you wouldn't publish a thing as a professional piece of
right.
literature.
You're not going to do a book, That's All Jake, or whatever the stupid Jake phrase is that
Right.
people from the 1920s use.
There's definitely That's All Jake.
Isn't that a thing? That's all Jake.
That's all, folks.
Okay, apparently that's not a thing at all. But everything's Jake. Everything's Jake, because Jake is a like 1920s phrase for everything's fine. You watch like an old bootlegger Al Capone type movie, and they'll say everything's Jake. Anyway,
This book. Yeah, so it's really interesting. So
You need
It
a
has-
Wilhelm scream on there.
Yeah, we do.
Ow!
Ow! James Brown is in here.
I feel good.
Da-da-da-da-da-da.
You know who didn't feel good?
Who's that?
Anna Karenina after she threw herself under that train.
Oh, she didn't feel anything at all.
No.
She probably felt something for a minute.
No, she did. Tolstoy describes
And
it.
I went back and reread that passage today, and it's really well done.
It's quite good. It's quite
Yeah.
good. It makes you not want to throw yourself in front of a train.
The little light that had illuminated all her bitterness and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Man.
Went out.
Take your meds, people.
Yeah.
Don't get depressed. Don't commit adultery.
Don't commit adultery. No, I imagine
Deal with your guilty conscience before God.
Yeah, that too.
Tolstoy like a Wilford Brimley type, telling people to take their depression medication.
Yeah, exactly.
I got the
Diabetes.
depression. I got the depression.
I got the
And
depression.
if you have the depression, take your medication.
You might be thinking about throwing yourself in front of a train.
This is Leo Tolstoy.
I'm Leonard Tolstoy. All right. Guys, I just looked up our reviews. Review interlude. 1 star from May 16th. Have a feeling these guys may have been at the insurrection. Check. Our incels, check. Hate women, minorities, or all of the above. Definitely all of the above. Not really looking for one's political agenda to come through on a book podcast.
Interesting.
Well, we weren't really looking for one's political agenda to come through on a review. Moo.
My review of this person is it would be nice if someone would listen to a podcast before they review it.
And then this person, another review, 1 star, too cynical, not for me. And then another one,
No.
listen,
what?
1 star, put off by the ranting. Listen to what I thought was a tossed off, dismissive review of The Passenger when whammo, the He-Man Girls Hater Club gavelled themselves to order. Come on,
You know
fellers.
You know what? Everybody can just be accused of being a He-Man woman hater for anything nowadays. I would say that we are probably about as far from that as you can get in the reformed world, and yet we still get accused of it.
Yeah.
I don't think we come across as misogynists or racists on this podcast. People need to learn how to actually listen and engage with something before just throwing straw man stupid arguments at it.
Yeah. Anyone who has those kinds of opinions is probably a woman and should be spanked.
Yeah. Get those shoes off and get in my kitchen.
Yeah.
That's how Kenneth Copeland would sound if he was
Yeah.
a millennial.
Yeah.
That's one of the reviews.
Wait, really?
Wait, us?
Yeah. Listen to these guys to understand how Kenneth Copeland would sound if he practiced millennial up talking and forced himself to speak in
Oh, my.
a soft tone and slow, intellectual, quote unquote, pace.
Wait, no, we don't do that. Brennan maybe does that. Brennan does the context where he's
Yeah, I mean,
sounds a little NPR, but
somebody doesn't know who Kenneth Copeland is.
Oh my goodness. Yep. Kenneth Copeland.
cruel, ignorant 80s televangelism comes to podcasts.
Well, good grief, man. You know what? I give our 1-star reviewers 1 star for all being stupid.
Good one. Got him.
Thank you.
This is a 3-star review. I love everything about the podcast except the senseless banter, which unfortunately goes on far too long and ends up being most of the podcast. I
Okay,
might have
fair
to give
enough.
up on it.
Fine. You
It's
know what? You get
3
at least
stars.
you tried to listen, so you get 4 stars for your review.
Yeah, it's like a great person. All right, Tolstoy's life. Tolstoy's stupid. No, we already talked about Tolstoy's
We
stupid
talked
life.
about his stupid
Talk about
life.
his stupid
I
novel.
was talking about the stupid novel and
Yep.
the way that this stupid novel came into existence. I'm going to lean into the cynicism.
Yep.
People don't realize when they criticize us, it just makes me into more of a monster.
Yep.
Hey,
Hay is for horses.
you know what's really helpful is this introduction to like our Pevier's book.
Yeah, it's good.
It's great. And he actually gives such a great overview of the way this novel came into existence. And I'm going to kind of lean on it here.
Yeah.
And people can go and they can read this for more detail. But just for those who don't want to do that, I just want to be up front here. We're just going to kind of do a summary of what he says because it's really great. It may not be Pevier. Who is it that's writing this?
I think it is.
Yeah, it is Pevier.
Yeah.
Good. I wasn't lying.
Not
You don't have to give
Volkansky.
us-
She's a woman. She
you
can't
know,
write.
Yeah, she can't write. She's cooking him a sandwich.
Wow, does she cook him his sandwiches?
Yeah, it's panini.
Okay. That's fair.
I mean, I prefer all my sandwiches to be hot. So.
Yeah.
I prefer all my sandwiches to be hot. Yeah. Great minds think alike.
So we're going to kind of jump around with his take on this right here. Apparently, the earliest mention of the possibility of this novel is in 1870, and it comes from his wife, who said he had envisioned the type of a married woman of high society who ruins herself. He said his task was to portray this woman not as guilty, but as only deserving of pity, and that once this type of woman appeared to him, all the characters and male types he had pictured earlier found their place and grouped themselves around here. Now it's all clear, he told me. Now what's interesting is this is the earliest instance we have of the possibility of this novel, but the reality when it came into existence is it did not take this shape initially. And we'll get there in just a minute. Apparently in 1873, he also had another mention of the possibility of a novel like this when he wrote to a friend saying that he had the idea of writing a book or a novel invoking the spirits at the time. So this was when he picked up a volume of Pushkin, and he had read all these stories by Pushkin, and he's come to this line, or this story, the guests arrived at the summer house. And then he started imagining characters and events which he developed, then naturally modified, and suddenly it all came together so well, so solidly that it had turned into a novel, the first draft of which was soon finished. A very lively, very engaging, complete novel, which I'm quite pleased with, and which will be ready in 15 days.
Famous last words.
Yeah, it was not actually ready for another 4 years. But anyways, that's when we first have the idea of this, and it's Tolstoy's. So another thing we'll get to in a minute, because this context is going to go for a while. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Okay. As we have, as I still want to talk about the books that are around this time, and then
You're a really bad shot, man.
and then I know I keep missing.
Most people would be dead by now.
Yeah. Everybody in this Barnes and Noble, though, man, they're all gone.
They're all gone.
Cleared it out.
I should probably quit using those Roger Rabbit bullets.
I like those Robert Radger bullets. Robert Radger.
Rabbit Run. Ugh.
Run, Roger, Rabbit, run.
See, now that we have the new format, we never have to do Updike.
No, we don't. Now that we had the old format, we never had to do Updike. I mean,
yeah, we could do Updike now, but I don't know if I want to.
Nah, I don't like Updike.
Yeah, I like his essays actually.
Yeah,
we don't do essays. Though.
Yeah. Maybe we'll do like an essay summer. I'd bring the crowds in.
Maybe.
Who cares?
Essay.
If we want to do it,
it'd be nice to do some of the New Yorker's best.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
I mean, I think we should just do the book. That guy that we like, that you and I like.
Up in the Old Hotel.
Yeah. What's that guy's name though?
Joseph Mitchell.
Yeah, we should just do Mitchell. I mean, that's not breaking faith with our listeners.
Not at all. I had students in AP Lit read Joseph Mitchell, and they really enjoyed it.
Yeah, of course they did.
Professor Seagull.
Professor Seagull's the name of the character from the book.
There's an essay.
People were maybe confused that you were Professor Seagull when you're taking it.
Hi,
Professor Seagull says you're going to enjoy this book. Squawk, squawk.
Squawk, squawk. It's like a morning DJ when I talk. Come on, kids, it's squawk, squawk time with Professor Seagull.
School's out for the summer, folks. I'd listen to Professor Seagull.
Yeah, now we can get to some more squawking. Keep it squawky, kids.
Keeping it squawky with Professor Seagull. This is why people don't like the podcast. A total waste of time.
Yeah, because we talk about things like, the history of Anna Karenina, and then Professor Seagull jumps in. I'm going to give the rest of this as Professor Seagull.
Yeah, I think you should.
It's been a while since we've done a character. Brittany, she's not been around.
We had Pat Outplaying.
Pat Outplaying, that's right.
I love Pat Outplaying.
All about Pat Outplaying.
Britney Spears.
Yeah. Hey, it's Britney Spears.
Oh, man, we never made the T-shirt. Remember the T-shirt we talked about?
No.
It took the line from the end of 1884. It was going to be, he loved Fat Alplane or something like that.
1884, that famous book.
Is that what I just said?
Yes, it is.
Oh, man. Back to the context of this book.
Yeah. He wrote the novel.
Something I found really interesting in here was apparently there was a real incident that inspired Anna Karenina in January. I mean, it's not fast, sad.
It's hilarious.
It's funny story, guys. In January of 1872, there was someone who was just a few miles from the estate where he lived, she was jilted by her lover and threw herself under a train. Why
are you laughing?
I don't know. And he went and he viewed the body, and it was deeply moved him, and I think inspired
The scene.
right? And what he knew now. And so it's knew now he wanted to happen to his main heroine. And so when he actually started to write the novel, it was very different though, right? When he actually, this is where we see that tension I was talking about earlier of this kind of conservative moralism, and then also the more metaphysical Russian ethical fraught side of him kind of coming into tension, right? So instead of writing the like cheesy conservative Christian film that we would all see at a movie theater nowadays, right? That's kind of what he started off doing.
Mm-hmm.
She's like vulgar and she's fat and she's loud and she's obnoxious. And there's this handsome, poetic at that time, a young gentleman that comes in and she flirts with him. And then her husband's like this contrite, quiet, reserved Christian man. And it's like looking at the love triangle. And that's the novel. But as he began to write it, Anna began to take on more character, and like that early vision that he had of making you sympathize with this woman started to seep back in. And that sort of moral conservative side that was kind of buttoned up, that aristocratic side of him, that Victorian side, right?
Right.
That started to kind of peel away. And then the husband began to take more of the shape that he has in the novel. And Vronsky became much less poetic and handsome. Like you can imagine some cheap novel about adultery trying to write it this way, because it has to make the guy out to be something like, this is the kind of guy that a woman like that would be attracted to, right? And this is the kind of woman that would do it. And this is the kind of man that you could sympathize with, but it'd just be bad.
Mm-hmm.
And instead, all these other characters started to come into it. The story of the Oblonskys come into it. The story of Kitty and Levin came into it. And then it just took the shape it has today. And I think that's because Tolstoy's innate sympathy towards people, which would drive him to be who he was later in life, unfortunately. But it was a real empathy that he had towards humans, even in their fallen, sinful condition. Right? It's what drove him to make the schools. It's what drove him to care so much about his serfs.
Right.
And that would drive him to ultimately find that he had sympathy for Anna. Until you get that last part of the novel where he's like doing, the first person, doing the sort of subconscious, unconscious realism that like before Joyce was doing it, right? To where he's entering into Anna's mind.
Right.
And showing you like, here she is at the end, completely given over to herself and to her sin. And it's still, even at that point, you can sympathize and you can realize this is how she got here, right? And so, I have no idea who that is. So anyways, that's the way the novel came into existence. It's a really fascinating history. Kind of like he wrote the greatest novel to have ever existed despite himself, right?
Right.
Because he was going to, and this then enters into the other part of this, which is that so he says that this is the only novel he had ever written, right? Mm-hmm. That up until this point, he had never written a novel. And so in the same introductory essay, there's a kind of a fascinating look at the other great Russian writers. You had Pushkin, you had Dostoevsky, you had Turgenev. Turgenev was arguably the only one who was a successful novelist. And even then, nobody considers him the greatest of the Russian writers.
Right.
And I think that's fair. We read Fathers and Sons, and none of us were like blown away by it. It doesn't enter into the... It's fine.
It's fine, but it doesn't enter into the discussion.
It's like it's basically the early version of what Anna Karenina would have been. It's not the same story, but you can see kind of that's the level of storytelling talent that's there.
Right.
That doesn't have the ability to take that and then make it into something bigger and more than that original concept, right?
Right.
Because it just feels fairly limited, parochial.
Right.
And yet Anna Karenina is very, very limited in its scope. It just deals with a cast of 7 characters, really. And yet it seems so much bigger than itself, right? And so there's this reality that Russia, if you think about like literary theory and things like that, we've talked about Shakespeare and how we are fairly sympathetic to Greenblatt and sort of the new historicism movement. Mm-hmm. I think there's a lot to be said for we talked about it when we did Ralph Ellison, that there is a way in which All of, yes, the Western canon, all that stuff feeds into the history of literature. But then inevitably a culture takes that and produces something that's completely unique to those people. And the Russians have created something that were completely unique to Russia.
Right.
You see it in their music too. They had this troubled, fraught relationship with the West, and which brought us guys like Tchaikovsky and brought us guys like Shostakovich and those great musicians that would come out in the 1800s, 1900s. And you see that also with literature. You had the novel, but no Russian felt like the novel really fit with Russian sympathies. Have you guys ever read Leskov?
No.
He was like a short storyteller and a fable writer. And a lot of people who love Russian literature say he's right up there with Dostoevsky and Tolstoy as one of the greatest fiction writers to have ever lived. But he could not write a novel. Chekhov tried to write novels, but could not write novels, right? Dostoevsky said he didn't write novels. And most people agree Dostoevsky didn't write novels, right? And so the only Russian writer who ever was really successful in writing a novel still wrote something so unique that it's more along the lines of Moby Dick, that you're like, it's a novel, but it's like...
It's in some other class of its own.
It's like super
bordering
novel.
on mythology, on epic poetry, on...
Exactly,
it's in its own sort of class.
Yeah, and so like even the great like Pushkin and Leskov, they all, or Dostoevsky, they all liken more of their fiction writing to poetry, right? And there is something poetic about the Russian way of writing, and something raw and something huge and monumental and stuff that they just can't get away from. It's like it's ingrained in their personality, right? That when it came up and it took the Western tradition of the novel, it came up with something completely unique in its own, right? And there's no European that could have ever written War and Peace or Anna Karenina, right?
Mm-hmm. It had to be Russian.
It had to be Russian, yeah. Yeah, and he did this, and given it's like Shakespeare. He took no Russian could have ever written. Chekhov wrote great plays, but nobody could have done Shakespeare outside of a British mind and Elizabethan age being, doing what Shakespeare did. It's like you just see these guys churning this unique art form and taking it and then making it completely their own.
Right.
I mean, Shakespeare did radical things with theater, and here Tolstoy is doing radical things with a novel and making something completely new, yet it's also still the form it was, right? It's just this. It's Anna Karenina, the greatest novel to have ever been written. So.
And uncopyable. I mean, who else is...
Yeah. Nobody. I mean, it's like, so he's taking all the elements that had been established as part of novel writing by Austen and the Brits, the rest of them, Dickens, a small cast of characters, main heroes. You have a protagonist, then you have the deuterotagonist or deuteragonist, however you say that. The secondary what do they call that?
I don't know how to pronounce it.
But you know what I'm saying, right? If we're trying to be technical with our terms. It takes all those elements and then just like mashes it into this Russian form. It's beautiful. So, yeah.
Yeah. It is.
But it is arguably
It's much more comparable. So I've been thinking about, I read this fun little essay on Michelangelo's David the other day. It's much more comparable to something like that, like in my mind, than it is to other novels. Like you have Michelangelo's David, which is this oversized take on the human form, exquisitely accurate in every possible detail in a way that feels just superhuman, transcendent, unmatched, both in its elegance, in its sophistication, and in its simplicity. Everything about that is like the pose and just it's just so simple, and yet so perfect, and it captures so much.
Yep,
it's just in this whole other world of artistry that very few people have ever, in any medium, been able to touch in terms of representing something transcendent about humanity. And that's what Tolstoy is able to do with words that nobody really before or since has ever done. And that's why it's hard to say it's a novel, or hard to quantify what it is about him that is so special. You say like nobody's done it. You can say that it's not repeatable. You can say all kinds of things, but it's just like, to what will you compare that sort of thing too. Years ago, Nathan, you introduced me to Stephen Millhauser, and it's like Millhauser's trying to talk about somebody like Tolstoy in every story that he writes. Like he's fantasizing about somebody that can capture humanity in macro or in micro.
What was that, Martin Dressler, where the hotel guy builds an underground world beneath his hotel that has its own sun, its own moon, its own toiletries, its own... Yep. He just wants to replicate everything about life.
Yeah, and it's just the obsessive quest to perfectly mimic reality in his art in a way that captures something. And part of what Millhauser's playing with is at a certain point, it's either going to be uncanny or it's going to be, you're going to lose the point because what are you trying to amplify? Like by just mimicking everything to perfection. But then you come to a Tolstoy or a Michelangelo and it's like, well, no, he's got something to say. Like,
it is actually what modern art at its best and at its worst wrestles with. It's the idea that if I walk past a pile of dirty laundry versus if I walk past a pile of dirty laundry under glass in a museum, does simply putting it under that glass lend it some kind of intrinsic artistic perspective that gives it some meaning? And we would kind of sneer and say no, or a very nihilistic, stupid one. But I think those kinds of experiments can be worth engaging in.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. So yeah,
I mean, I hate going to those museums.
I do too, but I understand what. Try to be someone who loves writing and wants to be a writer when something like War and Peace or Anna Karenina exists. Sometimes you're just like, what's the point?
Well, the other thing I'm thinking is that in form, what it actually matches the most, and this isn't a very highfalutin comparison perhaps, but some of the peak TV shows, things like Mad Men, shows that aren't, not so much like a Breaking Bad, which is very plot driven, but like a Mad Men or maybe a Sopranos to some extent, where The Wire, where it's just like, we just forget about the plot engine. What we want to do is just live in Don Draper's world, understand how he goes to the bathroom, understand his sex life, understand the movies that he's seeing. We want to we want you to live there. And it's not just Don Draper, it's a whole cast. And we want you to just...
And they all have their point of view and they're all unique, well-drawn characters. And they're all living in this world that's a little foreign to you, but we really care about a lot and really are connected to. And you're connected to it too. And we want you to feel as connected to it as we are, or we feel like we are. We want to. There are things that you can understand about. In the case of Mad Men, about your grandfather,
right,
who lived in the 50s and 60s, and was this certain kind of person that we've sort of lost touch with. And then there's Tolstoy's. Like, there's something deeply human about the Russian character that I just want to try to quantify, and I can't give you an abstraction, but what I can do is give you 12 people who are all uniquely Russian people in their own way. And I can put them in situations that you see something that is both completely human and completely Russian and transcendent while being just as meat and potatoes as you can possibly be.
Right.
And
can I read something?
Yeah.
In a letter to Strakov, Tolstoy said this: "In everything or almost everything I have written, I have been moved by the need to bring together ideas that are closely knit in order to express myself, but each idea, expressed separately in words, loses its meaning, is enormously impoverished when removed from the network around it. This network itself is not made up of ideas, but of something else, and it is absolutely impossible to express the substance of this network directly in words. It can be done only indirectly, by using words to describe characters, acts, and situations." So I think that's kind of what you're getting at, is that he expresses something bigger, something more, but the only way he can get about it is through this detailed description of ordinary life.
The more specific he becomes, the more universal he becomes, which is a pretty common thing to say about art, but I think it really fits what someone like Tolstoy does specifically. It's like the more Anna is a Russian woman with Russian problems of her time and of her place, the more we can all enter into everything.
The more that she's a Petersburg woman.
Yeah. And that is what, so this introductory essay talks about what does make this kind of the first Russian novel is that it's willing to just deal with like an extraordinarily ordinary aristocratic family doing extraordinarily ordinary things, right? There just really is an ordinariness to it. that makes it a novel. And yet he manages to take that ordinary and go beyond it.
Yeah.
Right. Which is what great works of art do. Right.
Well, yeah. And
which is,
so Michael, I think that's why I want to, Michelangelo's David keeps popping into my mind. He's just a guy who's standing there naked.
Yeah.
But boy, does he capture something.
Yep. Or like the closest we
And
can.
it's stupid. It's like the most cliched thing I could possibly pull. But, I read that essay like yesterday. And so.
No, it's not stupid. It's the closest. I mean, we're talking about Mad Men or The Wire or something, right? It takes the ordinary and the life of a Baltimore.
Mm-hmm.
And this will be The Wire.
Yeah.
And just says, actually, though, I mean, it's trying to kind of drag you through the grime and unordinariness of it. So.
Yeah, but The Wire wants to be as kind of down to earth, and this is not a cop TV show. This is just life. In both of those cases, those shows have enough plot that they, like Tolstoy, there's enough of a plot engine to kind of keep you moving. Like it doesn't just become observation. It doesn't ever quite abandon narrative form.
Yeah.
Which is what the postmodernists would finally start experimenting with. But,
or even with so another thing is just how polemical the idea behind this book. So going back to kind of an Austinian vision of the world was in of itself in the 70s kind of a bold move to make. Like we were through the 50s and 60s, which was the height of the Victorian age, where you had the family dramas. And by the 70s, things were getting a little more. You had the first kind of rumblings of feminism, or late rumblings too, from the Wollstonecrafts, but still. A romanticism had happened in the early 1800s, but was kind of coming back and emerging again. People were getting tired of capitalism, and they were getting tired of the aristocrats and their abuse of the poor. All these things were coming back into the forefront. And so for him to then just say, here's a novel about the ordinariness of life, and I'm just going to focus on marriage, that kind of was out of style at the time.
That's interesting.
It was out of fashion. And the fact that this novel ends up basically saying that, I think even Tolstoy said this somewhere, that the greatest happiness that a man can have is to have a happy family. Right? Is to have a happy marriage. That's where happiness is. It's not in, like he thought that women, their greatest achievement in life was to be a good mother and wife at home. Like he actually really believed that. And so that's why he focuses on that with Kitty and Levin, right? And with Anna and Vronsky and how their life falls apart because of it. Mm-hmm. And the sad stuff that surrounds Anna's child, right? Man.
Yeah.
And so he finds the beauty in that ordinariness. Like what Jake was saying about David is he takes this thing that we just take for granted and shows us that there's reasons to just admire it.
Right. Well, David's such an interesting case because David is perfect.
Yeah.
I mean, he is a beautiful man. Well, I mean, he is. That's what he was setting out to do, right? And yet in the specificity of his beauty, he becomes a universal man, which is fascinating to me. I've got a quote from the Favre introduction I want to read if I may. So it says, up to the point of writing Anna Karenina, the artist in Tolstoy had balanced the moralist. After Anna, the moralist dominated the artist. How difficult it was for Tolstoy to keep that balance we can see from the work on the portrayal of Anna. The enigma of Anna is at the heart of the novel. In the earlier drafts, she was quite fully explained. Tolstoy described her past, how she came to marry at the age of 18, a man who was 12 years her senior, mistaking her wish to shine in society for love, how she discovered her full femininity only at the age of 30. He stated explicitly that the devil had taken possession of her soul, that she had known these diabolical impulses before, and so on. Of this abundance of commentary, only a few traces remain in the final portrait of Anna. As Tolstoy worked, he removed virtually all the details of her past, all explanations, all discussions of her motive, replacing them by hints, suggestions, half-tones, and blurred outlines, which I think is fascinating because we think of Tolstoy as the great realist who tells you everything there is to tell, and yet he systematically went through and removed so much explanation about this woman, so much backstory that would have given us A and B and C, like, okay, of course she's doing this because he removed all that stuff.
Yep.
And somehow I think created a greater psychological realism by doing that.
Well, nobody's as clean as all that.
Right.
Right. It's never A plus B equals C and why we do what we do. And we always want to try to fit a narrative, fit a story, retroactively explain things. And that's why all kinds of different psychological schools have their hold, but they all take one perspective and they stretch the rubber band as far as it'll go. My mommy made me this way. My daddy made me this way. My childhood this, my trauma that, this thing that happened, or my environment, or there's just all kinds of things and it's all contributing factors, all part of the story. But at the end of the day, everything's much more complex than that. There's a lot more gray.
Yeah.
And we're still responsible for what we do. And when it comes to a character like Anna, the more backstory you put in, the more you actually deflect from the fact that she's an actor who's acting. And so you hint and you leave some breadcrumbs out there, and you can piece together different factors that shaped her or play into her motivations, but then you never distract from the fact that she's still a person who's responsible for who she is and what she does.
I don't know how many times I've heard great dramatists say something like, there's no such thing as character, there's only action. And I'm always like, what? That doesn't make sense with life. That doesn't make sense with all the drama that I really like.
Yep.
But when you talk about it, like Jake was just talking about it, you begin to understand Anna Karenina is what Anna Karenina does. And that's what makes Anna Karenina interesting and what provides the dramatic spark of the novel. It's not ultimately just about some cheap, like, well, Anna was hurt this way or Anna grew up this way. We have a woman who could have made one choice. Instead, she made the other choice. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of circular. She made the choice because of who she is, and she is who she is because she made the choice. And that's kind of life. And it's interesting in thinking about all the backstory stuff that I read that he cut out. You kind of get the sense that most of those things are true in the novel. You know, the fact that there's an age gap between her and her husband, this fact that there's she married unwisely and youngly.
And young. Yeah. That's all there.
It's all there. And that she's maybe not quite as classy as she lets on, that she's got a lot of natural beauty and class, but also she's in the wrong social caste somehow. Like you get all that.
Or that instead of being like vindictive, and she's even surprised by it. Like when she goes and takes Vronsky from Kitty.
Right.
Like she even seems moderately surprised by that. So those suggestions just about even her motivations.
Right. And then what we learn from how truly cruel she does get trying to seduce Levin.
But it's just, those are all just drawn in a way that allows you to be sympathetic.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's actually just a brief aside to anybody who's aspiring to try and be a writer or anything like that, that often suggestion does a lot more than like stopping and having them give you bad dialogue to explain things.
Yes, absolutely.
Like, I like A Quiet Place. It's fun. But we just watched it recently again with Elliot or somebody, I forget who. But anyways, the scene where it like has the whiteboard and he writes, "What is their weakness?" ?
Mm-hmm.
Stuff like that. That's just like, you don't have to have that sort of stuff. It actually kind of distracts from.
No, it's insulting because there's no one in the audience except for 5-year-olds that don't, and I don't know why 5-year-olds are seeing A Quiet Place, but we can all figure that out for ourselves. And we really
all
feel
know that the dad's thinking those thoughts. We don't have to have a whiteboard telling us those things.
If there's a whiteboard and he's writing on it, it's because he's trying to solve the one problem in his life, which is sound aliens.
And by the fact that the aliens seem to be looking around and listening, we know that we don't need to have like newspapers telling us that it seems like they hear sounds and that's why they kill you. You don't have to be. So suggestion can do a lot.
Well, I've said this a million times, but one of the mantras that I live by is a quote from the great Billy Wilder, the director of Double Indemnity and writer of many great movies, The Apartment, Some Like It Hot, things like that. And he said, tell the audience that 2 + 2 = 4 and they'll be okay with that. Give them 2 and 2, let them make 4 and they'll love you forever.
Yeah.
And I think it's true. People feel complimented. We actually feel flattered by an author in a nice way when the author allows us to put things together. And we have that little moment of excitement, like, oh, I get it. Anna's this way because of that. We like to do a little work, actually, in our amusements.
Yeah, and Tolstoy actually is good at that. So thinking to War and Peace, we don't really ever get a full background on Pierre. We're just left to guess that he was kind of a disappointment to his father, grew up aristocratic and did some things that we see him dance with a bear.
Mm-hmm.
We get stories that show us who he was and his character. But we never have someone pause and say, "Oh, did you ever hear about old Pierre? Let me tell you some stories about him," right?
That's why I hate most flashbacks in most movies. I mean, you can imagine somebody making Anna Karenina and Levin's walking down the hallway to give Kitty his diary. And then we have a lame, like, and suddenly he's like at a party and there's pretty girls around him and champagne flowing. And it's like, you don't have to tell us that. Just have her look sad after she reads the darn diary. That's all we need. And if you start to actually clock this, you'll notice that almost every flashback in a movie is there for the idiots, or there because they thought we needed visual dramatization, which was cinema. I'm sympathetic to visually dramatizing things is nice.
But eyes and silence and actors can use those things to tell you a lot.
Yeah.
You don't need to. So, yeah. Anyways.
But where would be the fun in that?
Oh,
You can get a little bit of extra flesh on the screen if you do the flashback of the journal, guys.
That's true.
Oh yeah, that is true. It's like
That's true.
so often it is an excuse to put in the gratuitous violence or sex that we didn't have a chance to. A great movie was kind of ruined by that. Silver Linings Playbook, love that movie, but they needlessly cut back to the trauma from his life, and it makes the movie much more R-rated than it needed to be.
Well,
What else you got, Brandon?
yeah, I got two more things.
All right.
One is just to kind of give, so I made that point that the 1870s were kind of actually, for this book to have been published, like kind of a Austen on steroids kind of book, was kind of a radical thing in that period. And you can kind of see that just seeing the other big books that were published during the 70s. Twain was active. So you had The Adventures of Tom Sawyer, some of his works as well. But Middlemarch was one of the big works from that period. Jules Verne was writing as well, but this was the era of Thomas Hardy. A lot of Thomas Hardy was being written during this period. So Far from the Madding Crowd, Return of the Native. And then the other big guy during this period would have been, so George Eliot was writing, but also Henry James was coming to the forefront.
Boo.
And so some more of these psychological and deeply nihilistic to an extent with Thomas Hardy, and really moving away from the focus on family to focusing more on the deep psychological trauma of capitalism, right? It's one way to put it, I suppose. Moving towards more of the political books of like the 80s. I've never read Sister Carrie. Have you?
I have read Sister Carrie, actually.
Good?
Dreiser's a little lame.
A little dry.
A little dry and a little overwrought, but it's a good book, I guess. Yeah. It's old Sister Carrie. She sleeps her way to the middle or something like that, as I recall.
Yeah, but books more along those lines, like talking about the misuse of the lower class and the class wars and the tensions there.
Yes, very much.
Like
This woman wouldn't have to sleep her way to the middle if it was
Industrial Revolution
yeah,
problems, things like that.
Yes,
right?
yes, very much.
As we're moving, and even in America, it's this post-Civil War, Reconstructionism, stuff like that. And so the world is moving more political and becoming more political, and you see it more in their writings. And Russia itself is having sort of the early flusters and stirrings of what would become the revolutions. And so,
What strikes me as you talk, sorry to interrupt, you said Hardy, Dreiser, and James, all these people feel like they just do not allow anything spontaneous to happen in their novels. There is such a design imposed on the material. It is so meticulously thought out and contained, and the world of those novels are so small.
yeah, Flaubert was writing during this period.
Flaubert, same thing. It's just all like, I came up with a design, I figured it out. They just have this real hermetically sealed feeling that is just the opposite of the Tolstoy's like, what was the horse thinking? Well, the horse was thinking this, and this guy over here was doing. And Tolstoy makes more mistakes. He has more there's just more life, more. Well, the novel wanted to go that direction, but it didn't really have a payoff for that. But I thought I wanted to talk about this thing over here. There's just.
Yeah, I mean, that just kind of marks the writers of that period. Zola was also writing during that period. Yeah, you still had some of your popular writers. Trollope was doing this, and he was just kind of his own thing. And probably Robert Louis Stevenson was writing, right?
Yeah, I think that's mid. Yeah,
but kind of the big players who were shaping the literary world, those were the guys. And so then here comes Anna Karenina, and kind of stands at odds to what those guys were doing with their works. And so, where in this book, the final statement really is, Levin's happy because Levin found happiness in his family, and Anna didn't, right? She broke that vow, and she suffers for it, and her family suffers for it. Her child suffers for it. The other thing that it's kind of standing against, because two other really important works came out in the 80s. One was The Origin of Species. So you had radical revolutions happening in science. And then you also had the rise of nihilism. Nietzsche was writing during the 80s. But Nietzsche was more influenced by what was already going on with some of the Russian thinkers, which had happened in the 50s. You saw this in Fathers and Sons, because that one guy, what was his name, Bazarov or whatever his name was.
Like the main guy?
Yeah, was a nihilist.
Yeah.
And nihilism in its early stages was a justifiable thing in Russia. It was seeing how awful the wealthy treated the poor and realizing something needed to happen. And so they became jaded with any sort of internal reform and realized that anarchy was the solution. So nihilism and anarchy were kind of hand in hand sisters. Not hand sisters. What am I thinking?
Hand and sisters? Hand and foot?
Hand and foot. They were hand and mouth disease.
Yeah, okay.
Foot
Hand in hand.
Yeah, they were hand in hand. Thank you. Oh, that was so hard. But yeah, and so, you can understand how these systems come about and be sympathetic to it, like communism when Marxism first came into existence. If they're not going to have Christianity as their solution, then you realize that the Industrial Revolution was bad and the wealthy take advantage of the poor. The Bible says they do, right? And so there's got to be some solution. You can't expect people to just not see this as a problem, right? Without getting too political. A bunch of neoconservatives think that Christianity and republicanism go hand in hand, as though capitalism is a Christian form of government. But yeah, maybe we shouldn't touch that right now. But anyways,
I'm just going to sit here and not say anything and let you do whatever you want.
Walk right into it. But Tolstoy had a very troubled relationship with all this, right? So he saw the nihilism. He was sympathetic to it. But in the end, he couldn't really completely give himself to it because he had this religious experience in the 70s. I don't think Tolstoy was a Christian, but he gave himself to Russian Orthodoxy, and which meant that he couldn't completely give himself to the atheism that went hand in hand with nihilism, right? The sort of, and actually kind of the hatred of people that goes hand in hand with nihilism. There's a way that we do have kind of two nihilists by the end of this book. The first was Levin's brother, right?
Yeah.
Who is a nihilist. And then Anna, towards the end, when she's about to kill herself, she just hates everybody around her, right? She can't stand people. And I think Tolstoy is showing us where nihilism can lead you. And it really is just a way, if that's your answer, then it leads you to just eventually spurn everybody, including yourself. And so even though he could be deeply sympathetic to the politics that wanted the system to change, he could not be sympathetic to the ideologies that undergirded that system. And so, but nihilism is very present throughout this book, right? You see it here. You see it in Dostoevsky. You see it all over Russian literature. Nihilism was kind of the fuel that fed the coming revolutions. And Tolstoy ultimately, with this book, sides himself against it because nihilism went hand in hand with a lot of the things that would come out in the 70s and 80s, which would be their own load of sexual revolutions, their own deconstructing of the family, all these things that came about with that way of thinking. And Tolstoy is saying, yes, I agree, the systems are bad. I think that Levins should free their serfs, but I don't in the end agree with you that just because that's bad, that everything needs to be done away with.
Right.
That there really are still good things in life. And that those good things are the conservative things that you guys are trying to destroy. So anyways, I think it's kind of important to put this book in context of the nihilism that was coming out at that time.
Yeah, makes total sense.
So anyways, yeah, wow.
Hey, that was a nice context.
How long did we go for?
This podcast is going to be maybe 2 hours. So
wow.
Should we do some donor shout outs, guys?
Yeah.
Hey, we're doing donor shout outs now, folks. How do you become a patron of the good podcast, The Bookening, gentlemen?
You go to patreon.com/The Bookening and you sign up to give in any amount that's value, you become a patron. How you get a shout out is you give at least $10 or more.
That's absolutely right.
$25 or more gets you an end of year t-shirt. $50 or more is our best reward level because it gets you a donor shout out, the end of year t-shirt, and every book that we read, personalized, signed by us.
Which thank you for hanging in through this sabbatical, I'll call it, patrons.
Yeah.
You will be getting I didn't want to send out books while everything was in total flux, but
we back, baby.
yeah, we back. We're going to send out some nice ones. And I am sorry about that lame Jeeves book that we sent you.
It was just a joke.
Yeah, it was a joke. Ha ha ha. We would never read Jeeves, first of all. I don't even know if we're going to try and fit Jeeves in at this point in this late in the game.
No.
But hey, it's funny.
If
He's got away with words, that guy.
He does.
There, we reviewed.
But that's all we would have to say on a podcast about him.
Yeah, I mean, we talk about his life, talk about how he worked for the Nazis.
But I don't want to talk about him. I want to talk about him.
Well, we do what we want. We've established that. He worked for the Nazis. He had a way with words.
Yeah.
And
and deserves the same pacing that you give to Wonder Woman.
Wonder Woman. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
He didn't run around in his underwear, so he's a step up from Wonder Woman.
Yeah.
I don't know if she fought the Nazis, though.
She did. He worked for him. So that's a step down from Wonder Woman. But he worked for them, presumably fully clothed.
Presumably.
So you think it balances out? Working for the Nazis with clothes on versus fighting the Nazis without clothes.
If there was
1-to-1 in your mind.
If I was in a labyrinth and there were two doors and I could go into a room where there was a woman in her underwear fighting the Nazis, or a room where there was a fully clothed man writing something for the Nazis, I think I would go into the room with the man.
Yeah.
I think this is a bad choice.
I think it's a perfect analogy for what we're talking about.
I just don't accept this
I don't know why
dilemma.
I don't know why I'm thinking of this, but in the third room would be E.B. White sneaking out the window because he doesn't want to do either. Remember when he had to face like his fans and he snuck out the window?
Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade style.
Yeah, that's my favorite story of any author I think we've read.
I don't remember.
I don't
the fact
remember
that he got
that, but
whacked upside the head with a
I'm with
canoe
you.
and-
That's my
Yeah.
that's my
That's
choice.
that's what I do.
Yeah.
My favorite story for an author we've read is Hemingway being drunk and pulling an entire light fixture down on his head, and then telling everyone the scar came from like a battle or something.
Yeah.
When I was fighting alligators, and
Oh man.
What a chump.
That Hemingway.
yeah,
Don't believe a word he says.
yeah. Even he didn't like the guy who shot him. I think I used that joke back in the Hemingway episode, but I'll never know because I won't listen to it. I don't listen to this trash. No, we do quality work. The banter is funny. The insights are second to none. This is a great podcast. I'm excited to be.
The insights are second rate.
Yeah, no.
But the banter's funny.
The banner's top notch.
Yeah, the banner's right up there with the best of podcasts.
Come for the second-rate insights, stay for the banner.
Stay for the banner.
Yeah.
Yep.
That needs to be the next review that goes up on Apple Podcasts.
Yeah, that'd be fun.
Come for the second rate. 5 stars, please.
Remember when we
5
used to
stars,
tell
come for the
people
second-rate
what to-
insight.
Yeah.
Stay for the banner.
Somebody needs to give that as a review.
Yeah. And
we
then
need reviews. We need reviews that aren't 1 star.
yeah, can you guys get us up to 4.5? If you've never reviewed us, we're down to 4.3 because all these people are like,
We got
It's
haters.
just a bunch of people that have stumbled onto us.
we have such a big back catalog now, which is awesome. Not that we're awesome, but it's been fun. We've been able to do this many years now. We have a big back catalog, which means someone's looking for a podcast on some random book. The Moon and Sixpence. I wonder if anyone's on a podcast about they might stumble
And then they're
across us.
surprised that we're Christians and have a Christian take on things and give us 1-star reviews.
They were
Right.
probably at the insurrection
Right.
because they have conservative beliefs, and I've got a simple mind.
And I won't say and what you have. All right. Bookening patrons. Donor shout outs. That's the name of this segment. We shout out our donors. And what should we say about
Whether they're more of a Levin or a Vronsky.
more of a oh, brother?
No.
Who's the other good man in this podcast or in this book?
They're more of a Levin or if they're more of a Pierre.
Ah, there we go. All right. How about Artful Anthony Dodger and Bootstrap Betsy?
They're a Pierre.
They're a Pierre. Yeah. And a Natasha, I guess.
Yeah.
How about Little Anthony's Cigar Store, Jake? Is it a Pierre or a Levin?
I'm going Levin.
Yeah, Levin's got that cigar, man.
Does Levin have a cigar, man?
I don't know, but he would. He's more of than Pierre. Pierre would get sick and throw up from a cigar.
That's
Yeah,
right.
Pierre's like gay. The immortal Chelsea E.
And then now,
Now we can't
Pierre.
say. Yeah.
You can't. What are you supposed to do?
But you could do Natasha or Kitty for the women.
Oh, okay.
Oh, she's a kitty.
She's a kitty. Jimmy Beam and Little Annie Oakley.
They're 11 and kitty.
They're 11 and Kitty. You could also do like 11 and Natasha if you want to like switch.
Spice it up.
Spice it up, yeah.
11 and Anna.
Yeah. All right. I'd like to apologize for the last 30 seconds of this podcast and for nothing else. Lily of the Valley, Jake.
Kitty.
Kitty. Andrew and Esther, the Lovebirds.
There are Pierre and Natasha.
There you go. Pierre and Natasha.
Natasha.
The Keith Master, Jake.
Pierre.
Pierre, yes, obviously. Jay and Katie, who are cold and love cheese, and also C.S. Lewis, including WFS.
Oh, they're 11 and Kitty if there ever was one.
Kitty, yep.
Yep. Yeah, they're great. DJ Sammy G.
You keep reframing every.
Well, we can't call anybody Pierre.
Yeah, but Pierre's gay. Oh, yeah, 11 and Kitty because they're awesome. So,
So
we
obviously,
just have to say Pierre and Natasha for people.
We don't let. No. Pierre
What are
and
you trying to
Natasha.
say?
Pierre's not gay. He's great. Love Pierre. Big fat guy. Gets everything wrong. Tries to murder the Pope or something like that. What does he do?
he wants to murder Napoleon.
That's right.
Because he reads it in letters like his alphabet soup or something.
Yeah. Natasha.
Oh, look at the alphabet soup says murder Napoleon.
No, Natasha's good, though. She's a good wife kind of person. Lady.
She's great.
Yeah. Bit of a rambunctious young woman, as I recall.
Played by Audrey
Yeah, she's played by Audrey Hepburn.
Yeah, she is.
But that's a bad casting.
It was bad
And
casting.
kind of a bad movie. I didn't even finish it or get very far in it. Listen, DJ Sammy G, is that where we are? Did we say who he was?
11.
What about Benny and Danny Tiberius? Dana Tiberius.
I mean, I guess they're 11 and Kitty.
Guys, Pierre and Natasha are great.
Fine.
I don't believe it.
Eric and Catherine from Beyond Window Breaks.
11 and Kitty.
Lavender's
11
green.
and Kitty.
Lavender's green, Dylan,
11.
Dylan. Lavender's blue. Lavender's green, Dylan, Dylan. I love you too.
11.
I jumped off a ledge expecting Brandon to catch me, and he kind of put out a hand and
Gave you a high five.
gave me a high five as I fell.
I jumped off with you.
All right. And Noah Constrictor.
11.
Mare Cheap.
Kitty.
Anthony of Skull Knights, Life, Liberty, The Pursuit of Cheese,
11.
and Brick Red.
Yeah, it's 11.
Jiu-Jitsu Jeffrey, The Texas Ranger.
11.
Midnight Ninja
I
Ellen.
like all of our patrons.
Yeah, me too.
Kitty.
Jay Brack and Ruin.
11.
11.
Eric and Kate, the Camp Champ Kings, who are warm and love bees.
11 and Kitty.
Yep.
Sweet Jamie Sunshine.
Kitty.
Dracula.
Cold Steel Cody.
Frankenstein.
Oh, man, we've made it so far.
We tried.
John Bombadillo, Bomb
almost
Diggity, and Captain Tennille, his mate.
Dracula.
And who's the woman?
11 Dracula.
Love and Dracula. She doesn't even get to be the bride of Dracula.
Yeah.
She's just Levin Dracula.
That'd be a fun t-shirt. Just Tolstoy is like Frankenstein and Dostoevsky is Dracula or something.
That'd be a great t-shirt. Although,
That'd be correct because
Yeah.
Frankenstein wins.
Oh, that's true.
yeah, but Dracula's
Shakespeare,
cooler.
Shakespeare could be Dracula.
Which novel would you rather read? If you had to read Dracula or Frankenstein right now?
Dracula.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, right? Frankenstein sucks. It's boring.
Frankenstein.
Saxophone Alex.
Frankenstein.
Ryan the Terror of Texas and Eric of
Dracula.
Cream and Crimson, who no longer are stuck in the cold, but please do send cheese.
Dracula.
And
And Kitty.
Kitty. Okay. Ben Solo
Bad
and
comp.
Kylo Ren.
Frankenstein.
And
Frankenstein.
two Frankensteins for the
Bride
price
of
one.
Frankenstein.
Yeah, the Bride of Frankenstein. John the Cosmic King of Chaos.
Dracula.
Matty Batman.
Frankenstein.
And here, okay, get your gun.
Dracula.
Zwife.
His wife. Dracula's wife.
Dracula's swife.
Dracula's wife.
Hey, Dracula, nice swife. Thor Ragnajosh.
Frankenstein.
Lady of the Crystal Lake.
Dracula's wife.
The Mysterious Phantom.
Frankenstein.
Jeremy the Dark Hooded, Lord of Death, and his brooding bride, Maya.
Pierre and Natasha.
Suckers. Remains of the J.
Frankenstein.
Can we just say, Remains of the J, not a great donor shout out name.
That's kind of fun.
We should have done better for
It's
you,
punny.
Remains.
It remains, yeah, we should
I
have
mean,
done,
it was just the timing. We were doing Remains of the Day, and
Yeah, you got it.
we should have done better for Remains. Is that what you said?
You got what you deserved.
I like the idea that his name is Remains, and what we came up with for him was Remains of the J. Speaking of great donor names, La Morte Trenton.
That's pretty good. Dracula.
And of course, Daniel, a man among men, and Jen, who strikes every now and again.
Frankenstein.
That's it.
Nice. Hey, that's
Hey,
still a good.
thanks,
list.
guys.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging around.
Thanks for hanging around.
Thank you.
No thanks to John and Jill and little baby Max,
Yeah.
who deserted us faster than Superman.
What?
Because he's fast. Flash, I guess. I don't know.
We're back, baby.
That was not the sound I wanted. Let me try this. Can you say we're back, baby, again?
We're back, baby.